The library was Lola's favorite place at night, quiet enough to breathe, warm enough to pretend the world outside didn't exist. Her work-study shift ended at midnight, but she always took her time shutting down the circulation desk. Books didn't demand anything from her. They didn't leave. They didn't lie. This Lola checked the last return bin, yawned, and reached for her bag when she heard it. A soft, stuttering thud from the basement. Lola froze. Most students didn't even know the library had a basement. It was technically the Special Collections Archive, but everyone jokingly called it the crypt. Probably a busted pipe, she murmured, though the sound had been too human. Still, she grabbed the staff flashlight, reminding herself she needed this job, and headed down the narrow stairwell. The fluorescent lights flickered once, then died altogether. The darkness below was thick, silent, waiting. She stepped off the last stair and heard breathing. Shallow, pained, not hers. Lola's light swept across metal shelves, boxes, old journals. Then the beam hit a smear of red on the floor. Her pulse spiked, and then she saw him. A young man, maybe mid-20s, slumped against a pillar. Tall, good-looking even, under the blood running down his arm and ribs. His pale gray shirt was darkened with crimson, and he held a trembling hand over his side as though trying to keep himself from falling apart. His eyes lifted to hers, dark, intense, terrified, but steady. "Don't scream," he whispered, voice raw with pain. "Please." Lola didn't scream, but she didn't step closer either. "You're shot," she said, forcing her voice not to shake. He swallowed. "I didn't have anywhere else to go." "What happened to you?" "People are looking for me," he managed. "Bad people." Lola hesitated. Should I call campus police? An ambulance? "No," he said quickly, panic sparking in his eyes. "They'll find me before help does. There's a mole, a traitor. Someone sent them after me." Lola's breath caught at the word sent. "Who are you?" she asked. He opened his mouth to answer, then winced as another wave of pain hit him. She saw then, not just one bullet wound, but two, maybe three. "My name is—" He paused, weighing something. "Jon. Jon Hahn." Something in the name tugged at Lola's memory. News headlines, whispered rumors, crime reports scrolling across TV screens in the student lounge. Hahn, as in the Hahn Syndicate, as in the Mafia Don whose reach stretched across Seoul and half of the Pacific. Lola stared. "Oh my God!" "I need to contact my father," Jon said. "But no one can know I'm alive except him. The traitor is close. Maybe here in California already." He met her eyes, pleading. "Please, I'm running out of time." Lola felt every instinct screaming at her to run upstairs, call someone, anyone. But she saw it sharply then. The fear in his eyes wasn't just fear of dying. It was fear of what would happen if he didn't die. A fear she recognized. The kind of fear kids in foster care learn too young. Lola exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said. "I'll help you." His shoulders sagged with Arjanef. "But," she continued, "we're doing this my way, and you're not dying in my library." Lola had patched Jon as best she could using the library's tiny first aid kit, her own sweatshirt, and pure stubbornness. He was still pale, still bleeding, but at least he was conscious and not slumping sideways every few seconds. The basement smelled faintly of old paper and iron. Jon leaned against a low shelf while Lola paced in front of him, phone in hand. "How exactly do you contact a Mafia Don?" she muttered. "You don't," Jon said, voice thin. "He contacts you if you know the right number. And you know it. Memorized since I was 14. He tried to straighten but hissed as pain lanced through his side. "Lola, you have to call him, not from your phone. There might already be a trace on you." Lola crossed her arms. "You're bleeding through my sweatshirt. I think I've earned the right to risk my phone if I want. He almost smiled. I'm trying to keep you alive. Too late, she muttered, dialing. I met you. He didn't argue. The number connected instantly. No ringing. Just a single cold voice. Who is speaking? Lola swallowed. My name is Lola Brooks. I work at the university. I found someone who said he's your son. A sharp inhale. Then silence so heavy Lola felt pressure in her ears. Let me hear him. Lola crouched and held the phone to John's ear. Appa, he whispered. A low, lethal growl came through the speaker. Who shot you? Men from Seoul. They found me. Someone in our house betrayed us. Are you safe? John's eyes drifted toward Lola. For now. And the girl? John hesitated. She saved my life. Lola saw something flicker across his face. Respect, maybe. Gratitude. Something that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. The Don's voice returned, measured and dangerous. Lola Brooks, you have done my family a great service. Do not trust anyone. I am sending men to retrieve my son. One will contact you with a phrase. The lantern burns at midnight. You respond with, and the shadows listen. Understood? Lola nodded before remembering he couldn't see her. Yes, understood. Keep him alive. The line went dead. Lola stared at the phone. I think your dad just threatened me politely. That was polite for him, John said. Lola leaned in to rewrap John's bandage, her fingers brushing his ribs. He flinched, not from pain, but from the closeness. You're trembling, she whispered. So are you, he murmured, meeting her eyes. She realized then how dangerously close they were. His breath warmed her cheek. She pulled back first. Later, when footsteps echoed above them, Lola grabbed John's hand and pulled him behind a row of filing cabinets. Her heart raced. His breath fanned the back of her neck. If they find us, he whispered, I won't let them hurt you. Don't be a hero, she snapped too softly. Too late, he whispered. 2 hours after calling the dawn, the library was supposed to be empty. It wasn't. Lola heard the creak of the stairwell door and froze. John's eyes sharpened instantly. How many? He whispered. One set of steps, she murmured. Then more behind them. A metallic click echoed down the stairs. A gun. John tried to stand, groaned, and nearly fell. Lola grabbed him under the arm. No, she hissed. Hide. They ducked behind the archive shelves just as a man stepped into view. Tall black coat, hair slicked back, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he had come for. He scanned the basement. Ah, yish, he said in Korean. The boy bleeds a trail. Lola's heart slammed so loudly she was afraid he could hear it. John whispered in her ear, Stay behind me. You can barely stand. Still better aim than you, he muttered. She elbowed him. The man moved closer, gun raised. John's breathing grew shallow. Lola grabbed the nearest object, a thick, leather-bound ledger, and waited. The man reached the corner where they hid. Lola swung the book as hard as she could, slamming it into the side of his head. He staggered. John lunged, tackling him to the floor, fighting through pain so intense he nearly passed out. Gunshots cracked. John yelled, shoving the man's arm upwards so bullets hit the ceiling. Lola grabbed the gun with both hands and kicked the attacker's knee, sending him sprawling. More footsteps thundered down the stairs. Lola panicked. More enemies, but a voice sharply called, The lantern burns at midnight. Lola gasped and shouted, And the shadows listen. 3 men rushed in, Korean, black suits, armed, and quickly disarmed the attacker. One of them knelt in front of John. Prince Han, he said urgently, we're taking you home. John's gaze flicked to Lola. Only if she comes too. Lola's breath caught. The men exchanged glances. This complicates many things, their leader said. John's jaw tightened. Then uncomplicate them. Lola looked back and forth between them as they talked about her. They acted like she wasn't even standing there. Hold up. Nobody said anything about me going anywhere. John looked at Lola and said calmly, "If you stay here, you die. If I go with you, I might die." Her voice rose an octave. "True, but I'd be there." John offered with a crooked smile on his face. "That's not comforting," Lola said, looking him in the eye. The leader spoke with a no-nonsense tone. "We must leave immediately. The mole has allies." "Great, fantastic, love that for me," Lola said, full of sarcasm. John quietly, almost a whisper, "Lola, please." Lola stared at him, at his too pale face, the blood, the desperation he was trying so hard to hide, and she knew. Her life was already changed. There was no going back. "Fine, but if anyone points a gun at me, I'm swinging another book." John smiling weakly. "Remind me not to get on your bad side. We leave. Now." It wasn't a request, it was a command coming from the leader. They helped John up, Lola supporting one side, as they slipped out a back exit into the cold California night. The real danger was only beginning. The night air outside the library felt colder than it should have. Sharp, biting, carrying the faint smell of eucalyptus and damp asphalt. The service alley behind the building was narrow and shadowed, lit only by a flickering orange security lamp that buzzed like an annoyed insect. The black SUV pulled into the alley without headlights, gliding to a silent stop like a predator that had always known how to stalk the dark. Its glossy paint reflected the library's brick wall in warped, oily shapes. Lola kept glancing over her shoulder, heart hammering with every distant sound. She was certain someone, anyone, would spot them, that the attacker would return, that the mole's allies would appear out of nowhere, that she'd made the worst decision of her life. John leaned heavily against her side, half conscious but forcing himself to stay awake, jaw clenched through sheer stubbornness. His weight was warm, solid, frighteningly human. Every time he swayed, she tightened her grip. The leader, Minja, moved with crisp efficiency, opening the back door of the SUV. He didn't look winded from the fight. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had spent years stepping into situations exactly like this. "In," he ordered. Lola planted her feet like she was rooting into the pavement. "No one's kidnapping me. Clarify that right now." Minjae didn't blink. "It's not kidnapping if you step in voluntarily." Lola opened her mouth to retort, but John beat her to it, voice paper thin. "Lola, please, I can't stay awake much longer." Her resolve wavered. She exhaled sharply, breath fogging in the cold. "Get in. But if this turns into some mafia nonsense," Minji deadpanned without shame, "it is literally mafia nonsense." Lola glared so hard she hoped it singed his eyebrows. "You're not helping." Minjae didn't even look apologetic. Lola slid into the SUV, pulling John in after her. He slumped against her shoulder the moment the door shut. His head rested lightly against her, warm despite the dried blood that stiffened his shirt. The smell of iron clung to him, mixing with faint cologne and gunpowder. He mumbled something in Korean, voice slurred and soft. Lola brushed a curl from her cheek. "What's he saying?" Minjae answered without turning from the front seat. "He's apologizing for bleeding on you." Lola blinked. "Oh, well, he can stop. It's fine." From her shoulder, John whispered, barely conscious, "It's not fine." Lola froze, breath caught. "You're in pain," she said quietly. "No," he murmured, voice heavy with exhaustion and truth. "You helping me. No one does that." Lola swallowed hard, throat tightening as she looked away. "I'm not no one, John." His fingers brushed hers, barely, but John Berate, warm, intentional, a spark that shouldn't have meant anything, but did. Minji cleared his throat loudly, practically barking the disapproval. No touching the boss's son when he's unconscious or conscious. Lola stuttered, flustered. He didn't, just drive. The SUV sped through the back streets of campus, headlights still dark, navigating shortcuts Lola didn't know existed. The city blurred past, quiet bungalows, shuttered shops, palm trees swaying under street lamps, and she realized with a slow roll of dread that wherever they were going, it wasn't a hospital. They stopped 20 minutes later in front of what looked like an abandoned auto repair warehouse on the industrial edge of town. The building was old brick and corrugated metal, windows blacked out, no signs, no lights, the kind of place you drove past without noticing. But inside was something else entirely. The moment Minji pushed open the rusted exterior door, Lola felt her breath hitch. The interior was spotless. Reinforced steel walls, security cameras, medical-grade equipment, rows of weapons neatly locked behind glass, a polished concrete floor that gleamed under bright LED lights. This wasn't a warehouse. This was a fortress disguised as decay. This was the safe house. Lola helped Jon out of the SUV, but Min-jae stepped in with surprising gentleness, lifting him before she could protest. Treatment room, now. A medic team rushed forward, silent, coordinated, efficient. Lola followed, but Min-jae blocked her path with an outstretched arm. You wait here. Lola crossed her arms, chin raised. I'm not leaving him. You are not family, Min-jae said flatly. Lola stepped closer, staring him down even though he towered over her. Maybe not, but he asked me to come. Min-jae hesitated, a tiny crack in his mask. Jon had never, ever, asked to bring an outsider into the fold. Fine, he said reluctantly, but stay out of the way. Lola pushed past him. Jon lay on a metal table under surgical lights so bright they bleached the color from his skin. His shirt had been cut away. 4 bullet wounds marked his body, angry, swollen, terrifyingly close to fatal. 2 grazes, one through the shoulder, one dangerously near his ribs. Lola's knees nearly buckled. Dr. Song, the medic, a stern Korean woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense posture, inspected the wounds with swift precision. You're lucky, Dr. Song said. Another centimeter and you'd be with your ancestors. Jon smirked weakly through the pain. I'm too handsome to die. Lola rolled her eyes, but her throat tightened painfully. Dr. Song glanced at Lola. You're the girl who found him? Lola nodded silently. Dr. Song's tone softened. Then you saved his life more than once. Lola stared at Jon, voice cracking. You didn't tell me there were 4 bullets. Jon met her gaze, eyes heavy-lidded but honest. If I told you everything, you wouldn't have helped me. You don't know that, Lola said. I was afraid you'd leave, Jon murmured. Dr. Song didn't pause her stitching. Less flirting. More breathing steadily, please. Lola turned scarlet. We're not flirting. Jon whispered, smiling. You started it. Min-jae groaned loudly from the corner. 4 hours later, Lola sat in a small waiting room, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold, the bitter residue mirroring the knot in her stomach. The room was sterile, a jarring contrast to the plush luxury of the building outside. The walls were reinforced steel, painted a pale, impersonal gray, and the silence was deep, a weighted, unnatural quiet. Every faint metallic sound, a distant vent humming, a door latch clicking somewhere far off, made her shoulders tense. Every passing shadow cast by the low-level clinical lighting felt like a coiled threat. She was in a cage, no matter how clean, and the world outside was closing in. Suddenly, the air pressure in the hallway seemed to drop. A primal instinct, not reason, told Lola something dangerous was approaching. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed on the polished floor outside. Thump, pause, Thump. 4 men in identical, meticulously tailored black suits entered first. They were tall, silent, and moved with a synchronized, chilling efficiency, their eyes sweeping the room like surveillance cameras. They parted, creating a path, and framed the man who followed. And behind them, Han Jisoo, the Don. His presence was a physical force, cold steel wrapped in the finest, darkest silk. He was controlled, every movement economical, every expression absent. He looked less like a man and more like a law of nature, lethal and inevitable. He moved as if the very atoms in the air understood his authority and parted for his passage. Lola rose slowly, her back straightening involuntarily, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was wearing the borrowed black sweatshirt and jeans and suddenly felt small, exposed, and utterly out of place. He looked at her only once, a single, razor-sharp glance that took her measure, assessed her threat level, and discarded her importance in a fraction of a second. It was calculating and brutally cold. Then, without breaking stride, he walked past her, his gaze already focused on the door to the medical room. Lola let out a silent, ragged exhale, feeling the tension drain from her body only to pool into cold dread. Minja, looking grim and exhausted, approached her. Nervous? He looks like he fires people with his eyes. Lola whispered, her voice tight. He does, Minja replied, his own tension palpable. He rubbed the back of his neck, his stare fixed on the medical room door. This place is a fortress, Lola, but even steel can't stop betrayal. Inside the high-tech medical room, Han Jisoo stood beside his son's bed. Jon lay pale against the white sheets, a network of monitors silently tracking his life signs. The Don placed a large hand on Jon's forehead, a rare, unguarded gesture of tenderness that melted the facade of the powerful man, revealing only a father. Appa. Jon's voice was a weak rasp, his eyes fluttering open. My son, I came as fast as I could, Don Han said, his voice deep, the anger barely suppressed beneath the surface. Jon, they were waiting for me. They knew I was at the library archives. Don Han's hand tightened slightly on Jon's forehead. I know who betrayed us. It took less than an hour to connect the dots. Jon's eyes, normally sharp with defiance, narrowed. Who? Don Han's jaw tightened, the muscle pulsing in his cheek. Someone you foolishly trusted. Jon froze, his breath catching painfully in his chest. It can't be him, not Jinho. Don Han's silence was confirmation. Lola, pressed against the hallway wall listening from the doorway, felt a shiver of ice run down her spine. A traitor, close enough to know Jon's precise location in California. Close enough to know his class schedule and his specific reason for being in the obscure library archives. Close enough to find him in America. The reality hit her with brutal force. Her life was now linked to a deadly manhunt. Later, when the room had fallen quiet and the sedatives took hold, Jon finally slept. Lola felt claustrophobic and slipped into the hallway, desperate for air that didn't smell of antiseptic and fear. She paced a short section of the steel corridor, her shadow stretching and warping under the distant lights. A man she hadn't seen before emerged from a nearby stairwell. He moved with an unnerving degenerate calm. Soft smile, expensive, beautifully tailored suit, more European designer than the heavy black armor the bodyguards wore. Perfect, relaxed posture. He radiated the easy confidence of old money, but something in the placid control of his eyes felt wrong. Miss Lola Brooks? He asked kindly, his voice like warm velvet. Lola snapped to attention, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Yes? I'm Sang-woo, he said with a respectful, almost deferential bow. I work closely with Jon and his father. I've heard much about your bravery and your resourcefulness. He was disarmingly warm, polite, and reassuring. Too reassuring. Lola's instincts, honed by a lifetime of caution, prickled with alarm. The hair on the back of her neck rose. He seemed to fill the silent, empty corridor. Sang-woo noticed her tension and gave a gentle, understanding laugh. I assure you, you're safe here, Miss Brooks. You've done a great service to our family. A heartbeat later, the tranquility shattered. Min-jae materialized, a black blur of sudden, intense fury. He grabbed Lola's arm above the elbow, his grip tight and painful, pulling her backward away from the man. Don't wander off, Min-jae snarled, his eyes blazing with alarm. And absolutely do not talk to strangers. Lola, startled and defensive, glared at him. He said he works for the Dawn. He introduced himself as Sang-woo. Min-jae stiffened, his entire posture freezing in predatory alertness. His eyes were wide, scanning the hallway wildly. What did he tell you he was called? Sang-woo. Min-jae whispered a vicious, raw curse in Korean. There is no Sang-woo in our organization, not one of that name. Lola's blood ran cold, the fear under the bed returning with a vengeance. She turned slowly, dread making the movement agonizingly Jon berate. The corridor was empty. The stairwell door was closed. The mole, the traitor who had almost killed Jon, had been inches from her. He hadn't harmed her, but he had extracted information, and most terrifyingly, he knew her name. That night, a muffled sound came from the medical room. Jon was awake and asking for Lola. She slipped inside. The low blue glow of the monitors was the only light, bathing the room in an ethereal, anxious atmosphere. Are you okay? Jon asked. His voice still weak, but his gaze intense and focused on her. Lola felt a rush of unexpected tenderness, a deep, weary empathy. I should be asking you that. Jon managed a small, weak smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I've had worse. She moved the chair closer to the bed and sat. The silence stretched between them, heavier now with the weight of Han Jisu's revelation. She saw the turmoil behind Jon's eyes, the betrayal, and a protective instinct flared. His hand drifted toward hers, tentative, unsure, but stopped, hovering awkwardly over the sheet. Lola looked down at his hesitant hand, then met his eyes. You can, if you want. He laced his fingers through hers, his grip surprisingly strong, yet fragile. I don't have many people I trust now, Jon said, his gaze locked on their joined hands. Lola looked at him, searching his face. And you trust me? I'm a stranger. Jon lifted his eyes, meeting hers pointedly, the pain and gratitude mixing in his expression. More than I should. The silence stretched warm, deep, and intimate between them. It felt like the first moment of genuine peace Lola had experienced since their ordeal began. Then, Jon tugged her hand gently, pulling her closer to the bed. Stay, he murmured, his eyes heavy. Just until I fall asleep. Lola hesitated for a long moment, watching the shadows of the machinery dance on the ceiling. This wasn't her world. This was a man of darkness and death. But she looked at the exhaustion in his eyes, at the tight, weary grip of his hand on hers. She stayed. Lola tried to tell herself that life had finally found its footing. 4 weeks had passed since the hospital room, and the hypervigilance was fading into routine. Classes had grudgingly resumed. She spent late nights in her small apartment catching up on assignments, fueled by cheap coffee and stubborn pride. Jon had even registered for the next semester, claiming with a forced lightness that he intended to achieve a normal college experience. But danger doesn't dissolve. It merely quiets. Like a predator holding its breath, it sinks into the landscape and waits. The main reading room of the college library, Lola's fortress of routine, was usually filled with the gentle thump of books, the soft tap, tap, tap of keyboards, and the low rustle of pages. One hazy California afternoon, as a soft, deceptive light streamed through the clear-story windows, Lola was performing the mechanical task of checking in returns at the front counter. Then the atmosphere fractured. A man entered. He was Korean, mid-30s, with a stiff, athletic build that strained the fabric of his clothes. He wore a heavy, expensive black leather jacket, a garment far too substantial for the mild California weather. His boots were polished, not tactical, but carried the same air of purpose. His eyes, cold and dark, swept the vast multi-story room, bypassing the students, the security cameras, and the signs, and settled instantly on Lola. He lingered on her a moment too long, a subtle but unmistakable assessment. Lola felt the instinctive, cold prickle of recognition, the same visceral alarm she'd felt in the hospital hallway. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her polite customer service monotone masking the spike of panic in her chest. Her voice was steady, but her grip tightened invisibly on the returned book in her hands. He offered a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, a calculated expression designed for deflection. "Just browsing the collection." He walked deeper into the stacks, his heavy jacket a black anomaly among the muted sweatshirts and backpacks of the students. He didn't look back, but Lola felt the weight of his attention nonetheless. Jon arrived 10 minutes later, slipping through the main doors. He stopped instantly, sensing the profound shift in her posture, the rigid line of her shoulders, the unnatural stillness of her hands. "What's wrong?" he murmured, his voice low, his eyes already searching the room. "That man," she whispered, not moving her lips much. "Far aisle." He walked past the nonfiction, and now he's by the periodicals. Something's profoundly off. Jon didn't look directly at the stacks. He angled his body slightly, catching the reflection of the library's central dome and the long, deep aisles in the mirrored glass of the security panel near the front door. His jaw tightened, a hard, cold line. "He's from Seoul. I recognize the cut of his jacket, the way he carries himself." Lola's pulse spiked, roaring in her ears. "I thought after the mole, after your father got involved, they were gone." "There were others," Jon cut her off, his voice barely audible above the quiet hum of the library. "People loyal not to my father, but to the man he replaced. They may not know I survived the first attempt. Or maybe." He paused, the silence pregnant with dread. "They just want to confirm it before they try again." Lola stepped closer to the counter, her whole body taut. "What do we do?" Jon squeezed her hand quickly, fiercely, over the edge of the desk. "We act normal. We check in your book, but we don't let him corner us. We don't break the pattern." The man eventually left, melting back out into the bright afternoon sun, but the echo of his presence stayed. The library felt hollowed out, the peaceful atmosphere irrevocably poisoned. Normal wasn't coming. Not easily, maybe not ever. That night, the air felt electric, the atmosphere outside Lola's studio apartment thick with the tension of the day. Jon insisted on walking her home, his gaze constantly sweeping the deserted street. As they reached her apartment steps, Lola stopped him, grabbing his arm firmly. "You're telling me everything," she said, her voice low but unyielding. Her eyes were fierce, cutting through his practiced control. "All of it, no more half answers. The whole truth, starting now." He looked utterly defeated, tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of exhaustion that settled in the soul, not the body. He nodded once, acknowledging her demand. Inside her small studio apartment, the safety felt tenuous. She made them both cups of tea, a simple grounding ritual, and sat opposite him on her worn sofa. The ceiling lamp cast a small, warm circle of light, leaving the corners of the room in deep shadow. Jon inhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling heavily. He began to speak, his voice flat, emotionless, a testament to how many times he must have rehearsed this confession over the years. When I was 12, my father made enemies, dangerous ones, men whose sons were killed in a war I had nothing to do with. They swore revenge, not just on him, but on his bloodline, on me. Lola listened silently, her fingers wrapped so tightly around the warm ceramic mug that her knuckles were white. The innocence of the tea and the comfortable familiarity of her small home felt like a cruel deception. My father sent me to America to keep me alive. He buried me in paperwork and assumed names, but someone inside his inner circle hated him enough to sell me out. The mole was only one of them. They are a faction. Lola's stomach twisted, the tea suddenly tasting like ash. So even after the library, even after the shooting, even after everything we survived, they're still hunting you here, now. Yes, he said, the single word a heavy finality. And now you're tangled in this because of me. You're exposed. Lola put her mug down with a decisive clink and leaned forward, her eyes catching the lamplight. She was not running. She was fighting. I didn't ask for any of this, Jon, but I'm not running. You hear me? I'm not leaving you to face this alone. His expression softened, the cold facade cracking to reveal something vulnerable, almost broken. You should, he whispered, the words barely audible. But I won't. He didn't argue. He pulled her into his arms, swift and sudden, his head buried against the curve of her neck. He held her with a desperate, crushing intensity, like she was the one tangible thing keeping him anchored against the violent tide of his life. She wrapped her arms around his waist and held him right back. The silence was the only true sound, a promise in the darkness. Danger returned faster than either expected. 2 nights later, Lola woke to a sharp tapping on her window. She froze. Tap, tap, tap. Slowly she reached for her phone, thumb hovering over Jon's contact. Then a whisper through the glass. Don't scream. Her breath caught. She peered through the curtain, her heart plummeting. A man stood on the fire escape, dressed in black, face half-shadowed. She called Jon. He picked up instantly. Lola, there's someone on my fire escape. Get under the bed, don't speak. She obeyed, crawling beneath the frame as quietly as possible. Her breath shook as heavy footsteps creaked above her. Her door lock clicked. Someone was inside. Lola jammed a trembling hand over her mouth. Footsteps moved slowly across her apartment. A foreign voice murmured something in Korean. Searching, patient. The intruder was checking closets, drawers, corners. Then, her front door burst open. Gunfire exploded. A scream. A heavy body hit the floor. She heard Jon shouting her name. Lola, where are you? She scrambled out from under the bed, sprinting into his arms. He held her so tight she couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to lose you. Lola shook all over. How did you get here so fast? I was outside, he admitted. I've been watching over your building all week. I didn't want to scare you. Emotion surged in her. Fear, gratitude, affection tangled with something much deeper. She whispered, Don't leave. Jon kissed her forehead. Never. Behind them, 2 of the Don's men dragged the intruder's unconscious body from the apartment. You're not safe here, Jon said. We're moving. Lola nodded, gripping his shirt like she might fall apart if she let go. Lola and Jon moved into a secure residence arranged by the Don, a high-rise with coded elevators, 24/7 guards, and a view of the ocean. For the first time, Lola had a home that wasn't temporary, wasn't fragile, wasn't something she'd lose if a foster placement changed or a landlord raised rent. This place felt safe. With Jon, safer. Classes continued. She studied in the mornings, he healed steadily, and in the evenings they cooked dinner together, badly, laughing at their mutual failure. One night, after sharing takeout on the balcony, Jon turned to her with serious eyes. "I don't know how long this war will last," he said, "but I know one thing. I want you in my future." Lola's heart pounded. "Jon, you don't have to answer now. Just know that I'm not going anywhere." She took his hand. "Then neither am I." Below them, city lights shimmered like a second sky. For the first time since she was a child, the future no longer terrified her. It felt possible, because now she wasn't alone. And Jon, despite his shadows, his past, the danger that clung to him, held her like she was the one thing worth fighting for. She squeezed his hand. "Whatever comes next," she whispered, "we face it together." He kissed her, slow and sure, as the world below continued spinning. The luxury apartment, a bubble of steel and glass high above the turbulent city, offered an illusion of safety. But the world Jon had pulled Lola into was too large and too violent to be contained by a mere address change. They were safe from the street thugs and the low-level operatives, but not from the Don himself. One evening, 3 weeks after they moved in, the tranquility shattered. Lola was in the kitchen, attempting to bake cookies, another shared failure, when the coded chime signaled an unscheduled visitor. A moment later, 2 of the permanent black-suited guards snapped to attention, their posture radiating sudden, rigid deference. The heavy, precise sound of expensive leather shoes on the marble floor preceded him. Han Ji-soo, the Don. He entered the vast living space, followed by his 4 closest men. The guards were lethal, cold extensions of his will, but it was the Don who commanded the space. His suit was flawless, his presence colder and sharper than the ocean air outside the massive windows. He didn't look at Lola. He looked at the room, assessing its security, its vulnerabilities. Jon, who had been lazily reviewing academic papers on the couch, rose instantly. He straightened, shedding the guise of the American college student to become the son of the Mafia Don. The shift was immediate and profound. "Appa," Jon said, his tone formal, respectful, and slightly wary. Don Han nodded curtly. His eyes finally landed on Lola, sweeping over her apron and the flour dusting her cheek. There was no warmth, only a deep, penetrating scrutiny. "The girl stays," he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate the very glass of the windows. "I will speak with you both." The 4 guards dispersed, sealing off the entrance and the service areas. Jon moved toward Lola, placing a hand on the small of her back, a possessive, protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by his father. Don Han didn't sit. He stood by the window, his back to the panoramic view of the shimmering Golden Gate Bridge. "The one who shot you," the Don began, his voice devoid of emotion, "was a contract killer, a disposable tool. But the mole, Jinho, the man you trusted, he is crucial." Jon's jaw tightened. "He betrayed us. What more do we need to know?" "He did not do it for money, Jon. He did it for power. He was working directly for the Sons of the Serpent, the faction that has been trying to kill you since you were a boy." The Don turned, his eyes burning into his sons. "They are using Jinho's knowledge of our network to hit us everywhere. We are losing ground in Seoul." The weight of this news settled heavily into the apartment. It was not just about revenge anymore. It was about a full-scale territorial war. Lola, standing beside Jon, felt the true magnitude of the danger for the first time. This wasn't a personal vendetta. It was the start of an organized campaign. "And Jinho?" Jon asked, his voice strained. "What of him?" Don Han's face was granite. He is in custody, and he has information we need. Information about the leadership of the Serpent faction in America. You want me to question him? Jon realized, the quiet realization hanging in the air. You are the one he betrayed, the Don stated simply. You will know how to make him talk. You will leave for a secure location in Oakland tonight. He finally looked at Lola, his eyes cold and assessing. This ends her involvement, Jon. She returns to her university, to her life. She is too valuable to be a distraction, too fragile to be a shield. Jon moved closer to Lola, placing his hand over hers. His defiance was quiet, but absolute. She stays with me, Appa. The air thickened instantly, the tension snapping taut like piano wire. It was a direct confrontation of wills. Don Han's eyes narrowed. You risk your life, your position for a girl you met 3 months ago? She saved my life, Jon insisted. Twice. I need her here. She is my anchor. The Don regarded Lola again, his scrutiny clinical, searching for the flaw that made her unworthy of such risk. Lola met his terrifying gaze head on. She did not flinch. She did not hide. She did not lower her eyes. She was wearing a flour-dusted apron, but in that moment, she felt every bit as fierce as the man staring her down. Don Han gave a slow, barely perceptible nod. The concession was agonizingly small, but immensely significant. Very well. She will go with you to Oakland, but she stays inside the secure facility. If she steps 1 foot outside, my men will bring her back to Seoul. Understood? Understood, Appa, Jon confirmed, Arjonef washing the tension from his shoulders. The Don turned to leave, his presence sucking the warmth from the air. At the door, he stopped and looked back, not at Jon, but at Lola. I do not forget a debt, Lola Brooks, he said, his voice a low promise. But if you become a weakness, I will Jon Minute the weakness. He was gone, leaving behind only the chilling scent of expensive cologne and fear. Jon immediately turned to Lola, his face etched with worry. I'm sorry, Lola. I shouldn't have defied him. You should go back to the university. She stopped him, placing her hands on his chest. Don't apologize for keeping me. I made my choice. We faced Jinho together. He kissed her fiercely, his Arjonef overwhelming. We leave in an hour. Pack only what you need. The transition from their opulent San Francisco high-rise to the grim necessity of the Oakland secure facility was swift, brutal, and utterly silent. Jon's security detail, 3 black SUVs moving with unsettling precision, cut through the Bay Area traffic like sharks through water. Lola, bundled in her favorite worn university sweatshirt, sat beside Jon in the back of the lead vehicle, the expensive leather seats a jarring contrast to the tension vibrating between them. The Golden Gate Bridge flashed by, its massive red trusses a symbol of freedom they were driving away from. Below them, the waters of the bay looked dark and indifferent. Lola kept glancing at Jon. He was focused, remote, already projecting the hard, cold competence required for the task ahead. He had shed the guise of the student entirely. Tonight, he was the heir to the Han Syndicate, heading into battle. What will happen to Jinho? Lola asked, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the engine. Jon didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the flashing city lights across the water. He is a traitor who orchestrated an attack on the Don's son. He will answer to my father. Lola shivered, picturing the Don's cold, absolute authority. But what does that mean, Jon? Are you going to hurt him? He finally turned, his eyes flat, carrying a darkness she hadn't seen since the library basement. He tried to kill me, Lola. If he had succeeded, The Sons of the Serpent would have gained the leverage they needed to start a war that would kill thousands. He deserves what is coming. She knew he was right, but the thought of violence, premeditated and formal, made her stomach clench. I know, she whispered, but you don't have to be the one to do it. Jon reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, the warmth grounding her. I have to be. My father needs to see I can handle this. I am the one who was betrayed. My word is what matters here. They pulled into a nondescript industrial zone in Oakland. The secure facility wasn't a sleek high-rise. It was a warehouse converted into a military-grade bunker. The exterior was reinforced concrete, windowless, intimidating. Inside, the atmosphere was sterile and functional, all metal and polished stone. 2 guards silently ushered them through 3 different coded doors into a small command center. Jon's personal team of 5 men was already in position, monitoring thermal feeds and surveillance screens. The main room was cold, lit by harsh fluorescent panels. In the center was a small, reinforced observation room, the interrogation chamber. Jinho is secured in there, Min-jae reported, his voice tight. He hasn't spoken a word since we brought him in. Jon nodded, his expression grim. He looked at the window of the interrogation room, but his gaze was vacant, focused inward. Lola's throat was dry. She looked at the small room, imagining the familiar face of the man who had pretended to be Jon's friend, now trapped inside. I'm going in, Jon said, adjusting the collar of his black shirt, the fabric a stark contrast to his pale skin. Lola stepped forward, her hand reaching out. Let me come with you. Jon looked genuinely startled. No, absolutely not. The Don said you stay here. This isn't a negotiation, Lola. This is necessary. I know what this is, she insisted, her voice surprisingly steady. But I was there when he shot you. I pulled you out of that basement. He tried to kill both of us, Jon. I have a right to see the face of the man who ended my normal life. He stared at her, recognizing the fierce, unshakable determination in her eyes, the same resolve she had shown when saving his life. He saw the truth. She wasn't fragile. She was forged in fire. Jon relented with a slow, reluctant sigh. Fine, but you do not speak. You do not move. You stay 2 steps behind me. The interrogation room was stark, a single metal table, 2 chairs, and a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. When the heavy steel door locked behind them, the sound was deafening. Jinho was sitting at the table, his head bowed. He wore civilian clothes, a simple, gray shirt, but his hands were cuffed to the table leg. He was older than Jon, with the handsome, trustworthy features Lola vaguely remembered from a few campus photos Jon had quickly discarded months ago. Jon stopped just inside the door, his presence filling the small space. Lola stood behind him, pressing herself against the cool concrete wall. Jinho slowly raised his head. When he saw Jon, the mask of indifference dropped, replaced by a flash of genuine, devastating guilt, quickly followed by bitter defiance. Look at you, Jon, Jinho said, his voice low, his Korean smooth and cultivated. Still alive. I thought the sniper was better. The sniper was a mercenary, Jon stated, his voice flat, dangerously calm. He was paid. You were family. You did it for the Sons of the Serpent. Jinho laughed, a harsh, rasping sound. Family? You had everything, Jon. The name, the power, the succession. I cleaned up your messes for a decade. I was always the loyal shadow, but I was always the shadow. They offered me the light. Jon stepped closer, planting his hands on the table, leaning in until he was inches from Jinho's face. The raw, personal rage was barely contained. You betrayed my father. You tried to murder me in a library basement on a campus thousands of miles from the battlefield. You attacked a civilian. Jon glanced back at Lola, his eyes cold and protective. Jinho's gaze followed, and he finally registered Lola's presence, her blue jeans and fear-etched face. A flicker of triumph crossed his eyes. The little library girl, she got you out of the ground floor, didn't she? Your weakness, Jon, your anchor, a beautiful vulnerability. Jon snapped, the control breaking. He lunged, grabbing Jinho by the collar, slamming his head back against the concrete wall with a sickening thud. Don't you dare touch her name. Jon's roar echoed off the steel walls. Lola didn't move. She stood rigid against the wall, witnessing the full terrifying ferocity of the man she loved. He wasn't the wounded student anymore. He was the Don's heir, defending his territory and his woman. Jon released him, breathing hard, his hands trembling with suppressed violence. He straightened, fixing his jacket. Control returned, heavier and sharper than before. You will tell me who in America is organizing the Serpent faction, Jon demanded, his voice now dangerously soft. You will tell me where they're meeting. You have 3 seconds to start talking, Jinho. The mole, panting from the impact, glared up at him. You think you scare me? You think your father's little temper tantrum scares me? I'd rather die than give you anything. Jon looked at the heavy steel door. He looked at Jinho. Then he looked at Lola, who met his gaze, her expression a mix of terror and understanding. This was the point of no return. The silence in the interrogation room was suffocating, broken only by the faint, frantic drumming of Lola's heart against her ribs. Jon's sudden, raw display of violence had shocked her, but it had also revealed the fierce, protective core of his loyalty. Now the danger was distilled into the quiet standoff between the betrayed and the betrayer. Jon didn't move. He simply stood over Jinho, his expression a mask of cold fury, his eyes promising a depth of retribution Jinho clearly understood. You have served the Han family since you were 16,